You're welcome back. Well, over the past 5 years, the agriculture sector has contributed an average of 23.5% to the GDP and generated 5.1% of export earnings for sector, which employed 34.66% in 2020, and that's according to the International Labour Organization. Developing the value chain could mean creating more employment and higher contribution to the GDP. How should we do this? I mean, we've talked a lot about the sector, but I guess there's still more to talk about. We have the Chief Executive Officer of Ella Lakes PLC, Chuka Modi, joining us to share his thoughts. Hello, Chuka, good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So we've talked a lot about the agriculture sector from what we now call our glorious days, you know, that seemed to be in the past before the discovery of crude oil,
Yes,
to what seems to be a lot of struggles now, insecurity, logistics struggle. Share with us, what are we missing out in the sector? Why does it seem like we are not maximizing the opportunities in the agricultural sector, especially when you talk about value chain development?
I don't think it's one simple thing that we're missing out on. There are a variety of things, and I think when you start from the policy perspective and then the implementation of policy, I think government has a large part to play in this, but also the private sector has a large part to play in this. I think, when you discuss things like access to credit for smallholders, fixing infrastructure, roads, rail, transport infrastructure that helps logistics. So these are sort of bottlenecks in the agricultural space that along the value chain, if they were fixed, could lead to more efficiency.
Well, when we talk about value chain, we'll be talking a lot about the issue of storage,
Yes,
preservation. I mean, you just talked about,
yes,
getting the crops from the rural area where most of them are produced to the. Have we made progress? Because we keep talking about it. It's just, have we made any progress?
I suppose the accurate answer is we've made some progress.
Laudable progress? Minute progress?
Meaningful progress. So let's address a few things. Say transport from rural areas to urban areas, so from the farm to essentially where most of the consumption is. If you don't fix roads, then it's really impossible to optimize your logistics. And if the roads are a responsibility of the government, now the government budget just simply doesn't have enough financing to fix all the roads necessary from the rural areas to the urban areas. So I think we have to look at a combination of ways in which to solve that particular problem. Silos, storage, simply put, the government doesn't have enough financing to also do this. So it's a combination of public sector and the private sector also trying to fix these problems.
So we have initiatives like the Rice Pyramid,
yes,
that was celebrated a couple of, I think it's about 2 weeks now, since that was celebrated. And one of the things that the CBN governor said there, because of course we had food inflation, leading inflation for a long time now, that initiatives such as that would make an impact, and we should see a tapering or moderation of food inflation. Do you share that perspective?
Well, I would say the rice pyramids are a result of certain policy initiatives trying to get credit into the private sector and focusing on particular crops to try and optimize production in those areas. What I would say is there are many ways of trying to do this. I mean, with Ella Lakes, we're focused on what the African Development Bank is doing in terms of trying to develop staple crop processing zones. We're in Enugu State. We just recently got into Ada rice in Enugu State, and we've also got 5,000 hectares in Ondo State. What we're trying to develop is in consonance with the African Development Bank, the AFDB. So we have staple crop processing zones where we're trying to compress or try and concentrate a large aspect of the value chain in one particular area. So we're doing maize, we're doing soya, and we're doing cassava. And the plan is to go from production of primary to processing all in the same space or in a particular area of space. So you have ancillary activities around that. And what you try to do is optimize your farm to fork value chain. And I think if this could be scaled up, that's one way of trying to increase efficiency in the agricultural space, or in the agribusiness space.
How can that be scaled up? What's remaining?
I think scaled up from the point of view of investment by large agribusinesses. There are significant ones in Nigeria: Bua, Dangote, flour mills, Okomu, Presco. So it's one, diversifying across a variety of food crops. So the Nigerian Agricultural Strategic Plan has a focus on 6 major crops. The African Development Bank has a focus on about 18 major food crops and cash crops. But I think you need significant companies who have large balance sheets, access to credit, and access to equity. And I think that's the most important thing, that they have access to significant amounts of equity to actually scale up. And we're talking billions of dollars in terms of trying to grow these staple crop processing zones. But what you do is, they're mostly in rural areas, because that's where you get the space to actually build these agri-parks. So we can call them agro-parks, processing zones. There are a variety of names for them. But if you can focus on these in rural areas, scale up and build the industrial framework around them, then what you've got is primary production, you've got processing, so you're optimizing the value chain in one particular area. And if you have a variety of them, what it does is it also takes ancillary jobs to rural areas, it takes non-farm jobs to rural areas. So it's almost like economics. You have a multiplier effect in these areas. So that grows the economy, not just the agribusiness space. And I think, that's one way. And I'm not saying that's the silver bullet to fixing the problem, but I think that's one way of taking a large part of the logistics problem out of the equation.
Isn't it possible, because, I know you mentioned just a handful of them now whose balance sheet you think can accommodate this. Isn't it possible to get medium players, capacity players to come together? So, because everybody's going to call on Dangote. Dangote is in the fertilizer.
True. And I think you're right. It shouldn't be to the exclusion of all others. I think we require all the players in the agribusiness space to work together. So the large players, the medium-sized players. And I think it's not possible to achieve food security and where we want to get to without even the smallholders being part of the equation. So I think even, like I said, policy is important, but how you implement the policy is also very important. So getting inputs to smallholders, fertilizers, herbicides, credit to buy seedlings, and if we could do that efficiently, then we have increased yields from smallholders. If we have increased yields from smallholders, there's more in terms of supply, a reduction in food price inflation, which I think is very important. And I think that's a start to trying to optimize the agribusiness value chain.
And then cocoa is the mainstay of Nigeria after oil. When you talk about the agriculture space.
As a subset of the agribusiness space, yes.
Yeah. But we still do the raw cocoa exports.
Mostly,
Are there conversations around adding value to a crop like cocoa? I know I spoke to someone on the program, and the person said, in some countries, because of Valentine, more attention and intentional strategies being put to develop things like cocoa because of chocolates, and Valentine is just around the corner. Are we having such conversations in Nigeria? Do we even see potentials like that?
I think, yes, you can have these conversations. There's at least one extant cocoa processing facility in Nigeria. I don't know how well it's doing, because we're not focusing on that space. But I think there are two important things here. If you want to process, you have to understand the nature of the market and the supply-demand framework. What is the consumption of chocolates in Nigeria? What's the size of the market in terms of finished products? Does it make sense to have a significant capital expenditure on trying to process when the market isn't here? So I have no idea about the nature of the finished products market, but I suspect the European market is probably bigger for chocolates.
So can't we process for export? We're talking about a reserve. A reserve is down now.
That would make a lot of sense. But of course, if you're
it could be a strategy. If it's not in our culture for consumption, it could just be a strategy to process for exports, and that could be another crude oil for us.
Agreed, very true. But to set up a cocoa processing plant, that's heavy industry. Most of the components would need to be imported into Nigeria. So you would need to have access to foreign exchange because you can't buy these products in Naira. If you had the equity to do that, then you have a buffer in terms of your investment. If you borrow the money, then you have debt to service, and then you have, you know, issues,
overhead costs.
Precisely. So it's a complex set of computations in deciding whether or not to do certain things. Is the market there? Is there an import substitution play, or does it make more sense to actually export the unfinished, the raw products? So processing, I think you have to take into you have to reflect on a variety of options before you decide on what to do.
Well, we have a market for tomatoes, but I hear we still import tomatoes, processed paste, tomato paste.
Tomato puree.
We still import it
because that's a function of the type of tomatoes that you're growing. One, where you're growing them to, and also having the industrial capacity to actually process it into paste and into puree.
So does that doesn't mean we cannot change our taste and accommodate what we have? China did it.
Yes,
I know.
true.
Some years back,
yes,
it used to be, China used to be known, you know, for the inferior quality and all that. But now, I mean, even their cars, they're being used. So.
But I don't think two things. I don't think we should ever underestimate the industrial capacity that China has always had. I think the base we're coming from is very, very, very different. And I think it's probably a slightly invidious comparison. Nigeria is coming from a separate place. The Chinese had latent industrial capacity. We have industrial capacity that is we don't have the sort of industrial capacity to grow. So in many aspects, we have to start from scratch. So you need also.
So where should we start from? I mean, we can't just give up on this great country with all the potentials
yeah.
we keep talking about. Where should we start from? What would be our low-hanging fruit, for instance?
Yes. Well, I would say potential. Everyone has potential.
Yes.
It's about actualizing it. And it goes back to the first point I made about policy. You've got to get the policies right first.
Don't we have policies? We do have a lot of great policies in Nigeria.
Policies are like potential. Unless you actualize them, they're of very little value or no value at all. And I think the policy implementation is part of the issue. The Nigerian macro picture also has a large part to play in it. So you want low inflation, so you have lower interest rates, which can provide better access to credit. If we fix the rail lines from, say, Lagos to Kano, if you reduce significantly the cost of transport, that probably adds a few hundred basis points to, you know, economic growth year on year. So there are a variety of, I think, interventions from the government perspective that, you know, if you're
and from what you have said, it seems the infrastructure development is at the very root of it. What are we losing in the aspect of infrastructure or lack of infrastructure development?
I don't want to hazard a guess as to what we're losing because it would be guesswork, but I think it's possible to compute what we're not gaining, which is significant growth. In the last 15 years, I don't think we've hit double-digit economic growth year on year at any point. And I think in order to actually have any kind of transformational steps, or it would be necessary to get to double-digit economic growth year on year in order to transform the space and to transform the economy.
And infrastructure development has a major role to play in that?
I think infrastructure development has a key role to play in that, and also I think just as key as infrastructure development is education. Education, I think, is possibly more important or just as important as developing the infrastructure, because if you import heavy industry, you need people who can actually manage the heavy industry. So education, I think, is a key aspect of the development and growth.
All right, thank you so much, Chuka Modi, for joining us for this conversation this morning, Chief Executive Officer of Ella Lakes PLC.
Thank you very much.
We do hope one day this conversation will change.
I expect so.
We'll not just be talking about the potential, but the fact that we have started and then we move to the next stage and the next stage. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much.